So our final lesson is lesson 5, errors, debugging, and importing. So let's start with the types of errors. And in Python, there are 3 main types of programming errors that you will encounter, called a syntax error, a runtime error, and a logic error. So to go through the steps of debugging, step 1 is to identify the bug. Is it a syntax, runtime, or logic related? Isolate the source of the bug. Which line of code are responsible for the bug? It'll tell you, like line 3, you made a syntax error. And to fix the bug, you want to determine a way to fix the bug and implement the fix. Then you can test the code again to see if it works.
All right, so the first type of error is the syntax error. So this is actually pretty common. While you guys have been coding, you probably might have seen this error. So if you think of programming as kind of like a language, then you can think of the syntax as the grammar, right? So kind of like English grammar, but instead it's syntax for programming. And so if you get like the grammar wrong, you'll normally get docked off marks in English, right? Well, the same thing happens in programming, except for the program, it just won't run. So they're also called compile time errors because they happen while the code compiles. That's not that important, but it's just cool to know. And like I said, your code won't run at all. So for example, if you see the example here, we have this piece of code here. And so we have this, if you look at the 4th line, it says for I in range loop times. And so as you know, you need to have a colon after this for statement, right? However, we do not have a colon. And as such, it throws us an error and it says syntax error, invalid syntax. So whenever you see syntax error, just know that it's not like a logic. Just know that you typed something wrong and you need to fix it. And so like, yeah, I said syntax errors tend to be very small and the E is to fix their debug. Wait, Ethan, do you want to show a couple more? Just like in Replit or something? Do you have a Replit thing open? Sure.
So Python.
Oh. So I guess show some syntax errors.
All right. Let's see. Say like print. Sorry. Print. As you can see.
Right.
Yeah, I misspelled print here, which makes it so.
Yeah. Wait, do you want to enlarge it a bit? I think you go to settings. Oh, there we go. Yeah, that works too.
That works? Okay.
Yeah. Right. So as you can see, like the print, it was PRNT instead of print, and it says it's called a name error, but syntax works too. Yeah.
So what else?
Yeah.
Do you want to take over my screen?
Does that work? Let's see.
Are you able to? Okay.
Okay, cool. Ooh, okay, awesome. Yeah, syntax error. What else are syntax errors? Oh, okay. I think honestly, it's just a lot of misspelling, forgetting stuff. So I think if you do like while, or okay, we can do like so like for I in range 3, and that's suppose we forget this bracket here, and so that we do like print I. We forgot the bracket here, so it's gonna throw us a syntax error. So like you'll usually notice these like really quickly. Like once it tells you like, oh, it's line 1, it's this thing right there. Then you could look at line 1, you're like, oh yeah, I need a bracket, and then you just do it, and then click run, and it works. So yeah, these are the easiest types of errors to fix. Go back to the slides. Yeah. All right.
We have
runtime, right? So so unlike syntax error, runtime happens after you run the program. So it's not like you spelled anything wrong or something. Like your code syntax is all correct, but it's actually an error in the logic of your code. And so there's a lot of different types. So there's like math errors. So for example, like dividing by 0, like you can't mathematically divide by 0, right? So if you do like, 6 divided by 0, then that just doesn't work. And so computers can't do like magic math. We have type errors, trying to add a string to an integer, right? So if you try to add a string to an integer, it doesn't work because they're different types, right? Null pointer errors. So for example, if you have a list that's, actually we just look at these, yeah. So for example, number 2, it says print 5 plus hello. So that doesn't work. And if you have like a my list, so right now my list is only has a length of 3, right? So you can only go up to index 2. So if you did my list at index 2, it'd give you 3. But now we're trying to do my list at 100, and it doesn't have the 100th index, so that's going to throw you an error too. And yeah, so runtime errors are harder to solve than syntax because you need to trace them. But it's like the error code usually tells you like around where to look. And also just like a general pointer, like I noticed that like a lot of people, or at least some people, like when they like run a code and like they get an error, they're just like, oh, this error code is stupid. Let me see what I can do. But actually what you want to do is actually look at the error and like look at what it tells you, because they're usually very helpful. So for example, here it says 0 division error, division by 0, and you can't divide by 0. So you know, okay, I'm dividing by 0 somewhere here. So yeah, I don't think we have to show a thing in Replit this time because these are pretty self-explanatory.
Now for number 3, there is a logic error, which happens when the program runs without crashing, but produces like an incorrect or unintended result. This means like it won't give you an error message, but it still is an error. So for this example, like although it seems simple, logic errors are the most difficult to solve since the console doesn't give an error message. So you have to go through your own code and try to pin down your own mistake. So in the example here, we see that we're trying to find the area, but we're using we're using wrong units, and yeah, so
yeah, it shouldn't be length plus length, right?
is that
Length time,
okay?
Right?
Are you able to like make examples? Don't try. All right. I think this one's pretty self-explanatory. Should be able to move on. So what is debugging? Debugging is a process in which a programmer identifies and removes errors in their program. And these errors are called bugs, hence the debugging.
Right, so so we just went over errors pretty quickly. And that's because like the whole process of errors and debugging is more for like a thing that you do. It's less of a thing that gets taught and more of a thing that like as you code more and as you run into more errors, you just learn by experience on how to solve them. And I think a really good thing to do while debugging, if you can't figure it out, is just to ask someone for help. So you can ask any of our execs for help, or like anyone you know that, for example, like your classmates. If you just really can't figure out why your program doesn't work, it's honestly just through experience which you learn how to debug well. Oh, and also just a mini thing. There's also like a Replit debugger, and so we're not really going to get into that, but it can be helpful. We'll have more resources at the end. But yeah, importing. So we touched on this briefly during some of our projects, and so when you import things, it's basically when you want to bring extra functionality into your code. So it's basically when someone else has written a very useful piece of code that you can just plug in directly into your library. So for example, some of the common ones, like the one we show here, is the random package. So theoretically, you could write your own random number generator using some mathy stuff. But why do that when someone already created a handy random package for you and you can just use it, right? And so the random package is a pretty standard package. So for example, you'll need to search up like what that package does and look into the documentation. And for example, it can print a random number between 2 specified ranges, or I could just print a number between 0 and 1. So that's the default one. There's also some other ones like math. So math lets you do more complicated math things. Like you can use like math.py to get like the exact value of pi if you want to use like, I don't know, something to do with circles. You can also use collections for more advanced data structures. So people in CP Python were learning about different, more complex data structures. So they will use collections for that. And I think someone said something in the chat. Yeah, so you can also import your code too, right? So if you, this is more advanced and it's not really mandatory, but if you have like a really, really long piece of code and you kind of want to separate into like different like files, then you could also like separate them into different files and then import them, right? Also, like if you have like one line, like a piece of code that you want to use across multiple Python, I guess like files, then that would be really useful too, just to write it once and then import it. But that's a little more complicated. We won't really be getting into that because I think right now, like just with introduction Python, like you won't really need to write that much code such that you need to divide it between files. Steven said, is this the last class? Yeah, so today is technically the last lesson, but we're going to, so we're actually going to get into this later because today's lesson is actually really short. The second half of the lesson will actually be going over like our sort of project, like our capstone project, where you get to make a game in Python, which is what we talked about at the very beginning. So we're going to be going over that near like probably around 4 o'clock. So yeah, we're just going to quickly go over, like this is just like some stuff you'll actually need to make your project. For example, if you want to make a battleship, you'll probably want to use the random package to simulate the computer. And okay, so the format is just really simple format is import module. So yeah, so for like the simpler packages, all you have to do is like import it and you're good. Some of the more complicated ones, you might have to like import it and then like configure the module somehow. So for example, you have your import Python, import random. And then after you have this random module, you can call functions off of it. So random.random. And so there's a lot of different types of modules, and there's also a lot of different functions that they have. So like I said, you probably want to look into the documentation too. Yeah, these modules can be very helpful too. All right. You think I'm going to the next slide? Yeah, so these are just some resources. So like we have errors and debugging. So that practice question right there, I mean that link, the CS circles one, which we'll be posting these slides later, you can look at. That's a very, very good lesson on debugging. And it actually goes specifically into the different types of it, like cases, and like gives you like example code that's wrong that you need to debug. And there's the replit debugger I was talking about earlier. And there's a list of errors that you might meet. Like as you program more and more, you're gonna see a bunch of different types of errors that at first you don't know what like they do at all, like what, but you can just look at that doc and see what that error actually means. And the fourth link right there is just a list of all the default modules and packages. There's like more. So there's actually something called pip, where it's like a Python package module manager that you can download that actually has a whole wide range of modules that like you can actually just make your own module and publish it on pip. But yeah, that's a bit more advanced. And what's next? Oh, okay, Kahoot. All right, so we are doing our Kahoot now.